Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson. Today's episode, November 4th, concentration and table awareness. As always, you can email the show at cashplays@pokerroad.com. Send me a Skype over at bart.hanson and check out those Poker Road forums at pokerroad.com/forums, and we've got a nice little forum going over there for Cash Plays. In the United States, today is Election Day, and I don't want to go on too much of a political rant, but there was quite an extensive thread over on pokerroad.com, the Cash Plays forum, about what Howard Lederer said when I interviewed him in London about a month ago, and about, Barack Obama. Some people took exception to the fact that they thought that Lederer was, using some of his clout to support Obama when neither candidate really has come out and said that they wanted to repeal the online gaming bill, and I'm not even sure if either one of them has publicly stated anything on that particular topic. The GOP's forum, the Republican forum, basically stated that, online gaming is immoral and that they support the prohibition and control of, internet gaming. I don't buy it really from either party. I just think, as Barry Greenstein, puts it, that basically they're going to support whoever pretty much, lines their pockets. Somebody, posted a response over there about how Washington State, basically outlawed online poker. And, that was because they were getting money from other gambling interests, and they weren't getting money from online poker. So they supported who gave them the money. Now, I think both parties are corrupt, and I don't know who I'm actually going to vote for tomorrow. I know that I'm not voting for McCain, and I know that I've never voted for a Democrat before. I don't like the way that the Democrats go about basically their financial philosophies of, whether you call it redistribution of wealth. I just never understand, the whole thing where the rich need to pay their fair share. I don't even understand how someone can explain to me that how it's actually fair that we have a graduated tax code where, people making more money pay a higher percentage. Like I said, I don't want to get bogged down too much in politics, but I actually am leaning towards Obama just for the sole reason that he might be better for poker. There's a slight chance that something will happen. I think there's more of a chance that in an Obama administration, something might happen with this online bill as opposed to a McCain administration. I pretty much disliked both candidates equally. And in the United States, it really doesn't matter because I live in California, and we have an electoral college system where California's already, it's going to go to Obama anyways. So my vote actually isn't going to really make a difference. It's a winner-take-all. Obama's going to get all the electoral votes in California. So I'm really up in the air. I think it's very discouraging that we have two weak candidates. So anyways, I'm undecided. But that's my little political rant for today. I want to bring up the fact, and again, I brought it up over the last couple of weeks, that I've been playing 510 now for 3 or 4 weeks. And what this basically has done is it's introduced me to an entirely new player pool. I'm not really familiar with the players. There isn't a whole lot of crossover at Commerce between the 510, which is a 1,500 cap game, and the 1020 No Limit, which is an uncapped game. Slight crossover, maybe 5 or 10% of the players play both games, but not much. So I've been trying to go and figure out some of the playing styles. Now, most of the players are weak, so they tend to fall in, certain categories. But I think that this will help all of you when you go and play live and you're not necessarily familiar with the player pool as to what to look for when you are trying to make certain decisions. And the number one thing that you need to do, and I'm a huge advocate of this, and I've been guilty of not doing this in the past, is paying attention at the table. Now, I know that I'm sure a lot of you wear headphones, you wear iPods, you listen to music. I fell into a trap where I was listening to podcasts, not poker podcasts, but, NFL podcasts, other types of podcasts. And it took my concentration away from paying attention to what my opponents were doing in certain hands. And I think a great exercise to do is to sit there and try to concentrate on all of the action that is going on, even when you are not involved in the hand. And people would say, well, Bart, I do that anyways. But really, do you? Do you really do that? You have to ask yourself. Because if you're not doing that, you're missing out on vital information, especially at the weaker games where people do not change their lines up and they fall into predictable patterns. And I'm going to go through 5 or 6 different things that I think that you should look for at the table. Number 1, of course, is betting patterns. Really try to put players, when you are not involved in a hand, on specific hands. What do they hold? Before showdown occurs, if showdown does occur, try to figure out a range of hands that this guy might have with the given action. One of the biggest things that you can do is see what a given player does after they raise pre-flop and on the flop with certain board textures. If it's heads up or if it's 3-ways, sometimes guys fall into very predictable patterns even at higher levels where they're so kind of, you call it tight weak, tight solid, that they're never going to bet the flop unless they have a good piece of it. And those are the types of players that you can call with suited connectors, not just to hit your hand, but to make a bet on the flop and take it away when they miss with a hand like ace-king. If you call with a hand like 5-6 suited, we've talked about that 20 times rule against, a tight pre-flop raiser, and the board comes out, 9-deuce-4, and the guy checks it over to you, if you bet, is he going to fold? Those are the types of things that you really need to be looking for. These patterns become incredibly transparent if you start paying attention to them. In multi-way pots, what do these guys do? They throw a bet out on the flop and a guy calls. What do they do on the turn? Do they continue to bet the turn if the board is draw heavy and the draw doesn't get there on the turn? Do they check it on the turn? Say they've raised with pocket jacks and a queen comes out, they take a stab at it. They check and a guy bets and they fold. Turn that idea around and take a look at the flat callers, what they are doing in the hands. Okay? Player A raises from early position. Player D calls. The board comes out jack 5-3 with 2 clubs. Player A bets. Player D calls. The turn is a queen now. Now player A checks. What does player D do? If he has a flush draw, does he always check it back? If he has top pair, let's say that I said jack 5-3, let's say the turn's now an 8, okay? An offsuit 8 that doesn't complete the draw. If he has top pair, does he always fire? If he has a pocket pair above, say, second pair, or any pocket pair for that matter, does he fire the turn putting, the pre-flop raiser on ace-king? I have to tell you that 99%, and there's a bigger player pool at 5-10 at Commerce than the 10-20 game, these guys do not change their lines up. If I see a guy who flats with 9s and the board comes out queen 4 deuce and a pre-flop raiser bets and he calls and now the turn's a 5, that guy is almost always going to check behind with 9s or he's always going to bet with 9s. If he flats with queen jack suited, okay, he's always going to check behind with the top pair, or he's going to bet the top pair. These guys do not mix up their lines. And that turn play really, really can clue you in to his range of hands. Is he the type of player that will check back top pair and then value bet the river when checked to at the end? Obviously a good play. Queen 5-3 with 2 clubs. Guy bets, you call with queen jack. turns an offsuit 8. He checks, you check. River's a deuce. Or maybe it pairs the 3. Deuce would complete 4-6, but maybe it pairs the 3. And the guy checks now again. Do you bet with queen jack for value to try to get a call from 10s, 9s, or jacks in that spot? Do you bet trying to get a call from ace king because the guy thinks that you have a draw? These are the types of questions that you have to ask about other players, and this is why it is so important to watch the action that is going on when you are not in a hand. And I know I've talked about being sociable at the table before and having a good time, and I think that there's ample time to do that. But I think people miss out when they have friends coming over and talking to them or bothering them, or they're, watching some sort of portable television, or you're fooling around with your iPod. I mean, these are spots where you're losing value, you're losing future earnings when you are not paying attention to an unfamiliar player pool. And you might even think that you're, fairly familiar with the player pool that you play now, but ask yourself, have you really been, giving your 100% attention to the way that these guys play, even if you play them every single day? Now, again, you're going to run into the players that can change their lines up. But I know that most of you play in games where players do not change their lines up. So it's very, very important to watch what these guys doing. Another big, big thing. Watch what they do with one pair bets on the river. Do they bet one pair on the river? Let's say they've been leading the entire time where, they raised it with ace queen and it came out queen 5 deuce. They bet a call, turns a 9, they bet a call, river's a 10. Do they bet again? Or say river pairs a 9. Now, a 10 might be a little bit different because they might be a little bit scared of queen 10, but that's, an interesting spot again, though. Queen 5 deuce, turns a 9, river's a 10. Draw doesn't get there. Do they bet again? With ace queen for value against a weaker queen. If they don't bet normally, when you see them bet the river, is it always a bluff? River play at these levels is one of the most important patterns that you can pick up. Watch these guys raising and check raising tendencies. One of the biggest things that I've picked up as a pattern with a lot of these guys at this particular 5-10 level is that a min raise is not indicative of a set. It's usually indicative of kind of a top pair hand. I'll give you an example. I actually limped in with jacks today after losing a big pot. And, I wasn't going to play a big pot. I was playing it for set value, like in a 4-way pot. And the board came out 7-5-3 with 2 clubs. And I bet out, and a guy in mid position called, and another guy in back raised 100. Got folded back around to me, and I just didn't really want to get involved. I folded, and the guy in the middle folded. And the guy turned over ace 7 like it was the nuts. You've raised it up with pocket kings. The board comes out 8-3-3. You throw out a bet there. Let's give an example, say 150. Okay, the guy raises you to 300. What I have found, and again, this is player dependent, is that raise is typical of a pocket 9s or pocket 10s type of hand. Now, some players are savvy enough to raise with a 3 or even 8s full in that spot. Others are not. Others think, well, I'm going to protect my hand. This is very, very exploitable if you can pick up on these patterns. Check raising tendencies. I have to tell you, some of the bigger things that I've seen over the last couple of weeks is that when somebody check raises out of the blind, they have 2 pair. That is specifically the hand that they have, especially in a limped pot. They normally don't lead out with their 2 pair hands. We're actually going to address how to play 2 pair because I got an email, and that's going to be towards the end of the show, about flopping 2 pair out of the blinds. But this is a pattern that I've seen that's almost 100% accurate. That these guys like to throw in big check raises, and they're almost playing their hands face up, where they don't do that with sets. So look at a guy when he check raises. You should ask yourself, have I seen this guy check raise? And if he has check raised, what has he held? I mean, that's a question that you could ask about any table. If you really think that you're familiar with a player pool, go and ask yourself, have I seen this guy check raise a flop? Have I seen him check raise a turn? And what does that represent? Normally at these levels, when you play towards the lower end, mid to lower end, a check raise on the turn is extremely, extremely strong. And people are not capable of making those plays as semi-bluffs on the turn. And again, I'm talking about specifically 5-10 live here, which is a rather small, a rather small game for me. I've talked about turn play. Figure out those guys that check back their top pairs when they're not the pre-flop raiser after flat calling pre-flop, have called the flop, and check back their top pairs for either pot control or for a little of trickiness, and look at the guys that will automatically bet their top pair no matter how weak their kicker is. Because again, that can be an exploitable play. You can check raise them. And there can be some fold equity that's found there when you have, some sort of draw. It's very frustrating in sometimes these games when you've got monster draws and you just lead and lead and lead, and these guys just call. Sometimes the best way to get fold equity is actually to make some check raises, because again, 99% of the time at this level, check raises are indicative of more than one pair. And even the weaker players know that if they get check raised on the turn on a queen 8 deuce 3 flop, and they've called the flop with their queen 10 offsuit and now bet the turn, or their queen 9 suited, that they're no good now if they're check raised. Who will check back top pair and bet for value on the river? I've already gone over that. That's just a super thing. It's a super important thing that you see at the higher levels, and you don't see it that much at the lower levels. Who will make thin value bets on the river with non-nut hands on scary boards? Let's put yourself in player as ace position here. You raise it up with 2 block aces. The board comes out 8 deuce 3 with 2 hearts. Guy checks to you. You bet. He calls. Turns a deuce. He checks to you again. You bet. He calls. 8 deuce 3. River's a 7. It completes a flush. He checks to you. Do you bet with aces? And I'm not saying that it's, normally for someone with my style, when I like to thinly value bet when you don't, have the possibility of being check raised at the end, I like to bet in that spot. But that's not the point of this exercise. It's the question, do you know if your opponents bet in that spot? If your common opponents in your player pool bet in that spot? Ask yourself these questions when you see these guys. Because if you can't answer those questions, you are not paying attention and you're not concentrating enough on the action when you're not involved in a hand. Now, I want to move along to kind of an interesting topic about people responding to Simoleus. The Simoleus 1 interview from a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people think that Simoleus was kind of griping about the games. It was interesting. There was a lot of kind of negative feedback through some of the emails and on the forums about how he's complaining because his win rate is cut. And I have to defend him here. Basically what Neiman was trying to say is that these training sites have endorsed a style of play where they have taught even the weaker players to change the 100 big blind game into a 30 or 40 big blind game. And what that does is it inherently cuts the good players' win rates. Because you're seeing 3 bets pre-flop, you're seeing 4 bets pre-flop, and you're just not deep enough to make weaker players make mistakes. Once you've put in 30, 40% of your stack pre-flop, there's very, very little play, and there's very little room to outplay those weaker opponents. And I think that that's what Neiman was trying to get at. That, people, the style of the game online in the 100 big blind game has just changed to this just aggressive shove fest. And if the better players realized that if they could keep the pot small pre-flop in these games, they would have more of an edge against the weaker players, then maybe they wouldn't have changed their style there in the first place. And inherently, when they do start jamming the pots up pre-flop, that they're slashing their win rates. So I have absolutely no problem with what Simoleus was saying in that, and I think that people might have taken it the wrong way when they think that he's griping about those games. Now, why hasn't he moved over to the 200 big blind games? You know, he said that most of his money was on stars. Someone made a good point, too, in the forums that in a lot of those 200 big blind games, you don't get those weaker players. Inherently, the weaker players are the ones that sit 50, 60 big blinds deep, and then maybe they get a little bit deeper in the 100 big blind games. So I have to defend Neiman on that one. We are going to take a little break, and we will be back with some emails right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays. Previously on All Strategy with Negreanu, Bonomo, and Huff.
The river, like you said, is the point where there's nothing left. You know, you can't get rivered anymore. You know, there's no worry about protecting your hand. You know, it's already
super
out there.
rivered.
So it's all up to you now to either screw it up, you know, or make it the right play in making the right bet size and all these kinds of things. And I would say that if there's one mistake that amateurs make more than not, it's not understanding bet sizing and really not betting the right amounts on the river based on the read of their opponent's hand. And that's an important concept in that the amount you choose to bet on the river should somehow be directly, let's say if you're looking to get called, should be directly related to how strong you think your opponent's hand is. So if you make the nut flush on the river, it's not enough to say, oh, there's 3,000 in the pot, I should bet 2,500. Well, what do you think your opponent has? You know, does your opponent, you think he's got bottom pair? Or based on the way he played his hand, does it look like he's got a set? Well, if you think he's got a set, maybe 2,500 might get you paid off. But if you think he might call you with bottom pair, maybe a smaller bet might work. And all of this is dependent so much on your read. So this is a fascinating street to play because so much of it depends on your read of the situation, what's happened so far, and your opponent.
All Strategy. Listen and learn. Cash Plays.
Welcome back, everyone, to Cash Plays. Before I get to the emails, one of the other things that I want to talk about when it comes to table awareness is rake awareness. And I'll tell you what the structure is at Commerce in the 5-10 game. And, you know, I know in Vegas it's a time collection. I'm not sure about Foxwoods. I don't remember the 5-10, and it could be smaller. But a lot of games that you guys play live at your level have rake structures. And the structure in Commerce at the 5-10 is, if there's no flop, they're taking $2 from the small blind. So it's 5-10. If you chop, they take $2. So they automatically take, you know, you've given $2 away in the small blind. If there's a flop, they take an additional $3 for the rake plus 1 for the bad beat jackpot. So it's $6 total. Now what this does, the difference between this type of structure and in a time collection game, is I really think it forces you to tighten up your completion range in the small blind. You know, I used to be kind of a proponent of completing with any two suited cards after maybe a few limpers. Now, if you find yourself in, you know, say there's, you know, the big blind, there's two limpers and you're in the small blind with a hand like 10-6 offsuit or even like 9-4 suited, something like that. I don't think it's worth it to put the extra $5 in because you're going to see a flop 4 ways and $6 from the $40 in the pot is being taken. You know, between, what is that, 15 and 20%. With less people, it's even worse. You know, with one limper in there, now the $30 pot, they're taking 6, they're taking 20% of the pot. So it does not make a whole lot of sense to limp in with just some hands, speculative hands. You know, Simoleus talked about how, you know, if you see like 6 or 7 limpers, it's correct to complete with any two in the small blind just to flop a monster. Again, in this type of rake structure, you really have to be aware of the amount of money they're taking when a flop is seen. because those little bits of money are things that really contribute to your win rate. So watch out for your small blind completion range in a heavily raked game. One of the other things that I see players do that's just a huge error. A lot of smokers do it. Guys that are going out to the table to smoke. Do not post dead in the first 4 positions. And, you might even go so far as to say in the first 5 positions, whether it's 9 or 10-handed. You are putting yourself, instead of waiting an additional 4 hands, in a 5-10 structured game, you're throwing an extra $15 in the pot because you have to post a dead small blind from when you missed the blinds, plus, the $10 for the big blind. It's just not worth it when you're going to be at a positional disadvantage in early position for the next 3 hands to post that money at this time. Wait around for the big blind. Now, you can post behind the button and maybe post, in the cutoff or one off the cutoff. But really past that, I think that for winning players, it's actually beneficial. Now you might say, well, missing hands. Yes, you're missing hands, but you're missing hands in disadvantageous positions. So watch when you are posting dead. It's all about rake awareness. People have emailed in, and we've talked about this a lot, about tipping. If you want to be a winning poker player, and I actually got several emails this week about guys saying, I'm trying to build a bankroll from scratch in a lower level, no limit game, in a 2-3 blinded 500 cap game, or a 2-3 blinded 300 cap game. You've got to watch your tipping. The dealers are going to hate me out there, but it really should not matter if you win a big pot or you win a small pot. Your tip rate should be pretty much constant. Now, sometimes I like to give maybe $2 or $3 in a very, very big pot, and sometimes I get some strange looks, but, I'm doing this for my living. I'm not doing this necessarily for entertainment. And, win rate. I've got 1,800 hours of records from the 5-10 uncapped game at the Bicycle Casino when I used to play before Live at the Bike. Now, inherently, if the game was exactly the same, I am at a $10 an hour disadvantage at the Commerce game, because in the Bikes game, it was $4 plus 0. At Commerce, it's $6 with the bad beat jackpot. $2 per pot. Now, $2 more per pot. If you're winning between 4 and 5 hands per hour, that's $8 to $10 plus the times that you're chopping the small blind. When at the Bike it was 50 cents, now it's $2 at Commerce. Inherently, it's going to be a $10 difference. So you really, really have to watch out for little bits and pieces that you bleed in heavily raked games. And again, of course, like I said, the whole theme of this show is watch your opponents, but watch the little things. Don't post dead, out of position. Just don't do the stupid things, because in these smaller games, the stuff just adds up like crazy. Again, you can email the show at cashplays@pokerroad.com. We're going to take a few emails here. And this email comes from Jason Pavalish in Stoneham, Massachusetts. And he wants to know about spread limit strategy. I've actually gotten probably 10 or 15 emails over the course of me doing the show the last, say, 8 or 9 months about spread limit, and we've never really addressed it. So I want to address it today on the show. I know that in Florida, they spread some spread limit games. Apparently in Arizona, they spread some spread limit games. So let's just get into this email here. It's a $5 to $150 spread limit with a maximum buy-in of $350. The blinds are 3 and 5. $1 the small blind goes to the jackpot. $2 rake on the flop, and a max of 5 rake total. A player can only bet or raise a maximum of $150 in each street. Unlimited re-raises against one opponent. 3 raises with multiple. Since this isn't quite a no-limit game, do you have any tips or have a guest that can address playing spread limit? I know it's pretty commonly run in Indian run casinos here in Arizona. Well, thank you for that email, Jason. And this is an interesting structure, and I'm not, terribly familiar with spread limit, but I would assume that this would be, a common structure. Spread limit being a hybrid between, kind of limit and no limit, almost playing a little bit like pot limit up to the point where the pot starts getting big. Now, with a max buy-in of $350, the spread limit doesn't make that much of a difference because each bet is capped at $150. But once you start to get deep, you have to start looking at what we talked about, those pre-flop equity type holdings. Now, I still think you can call with pocket pairs for set value, but you have to understand that obviously the amount of money that you're going to win is going to be capped on each street to 150. And unless you're playing an absolute maniac, he's not going to re-raise back when you flop a set of eights on an 8, 3-4 board, even if the guy has an overpair. Because there isn't really any type of way for him to what he perceives to protect against a draw. Now, maybe some guys do raise back, but if you just think of the nature of the game, popping it back 150, it becomes like 75 150 limit. So I think you can call with your small pocket pairs and just jam the hell out of it, but you've got to realize if a guy opens for 70 and he's the type of player that isn't going to jam back with an overpair, that heads up, you're going to be capped to making 150 on the flop, 150 on the turn, 150 on the river. So I think you need to tighten up that stack size to raise size ratio, maybe to like 15-25 or 20-30 when it comes to pocket pairs or suited connectors, maybe even 20 times, 40 times. The thing with suited connectors too is, we talk about the inherent value of being able to push draws. Well, when you're playing in a spread limit game, if a guy has top pair and you bump it up to 150 and and he's really deep, he knows that he can't lose his entire stack. Say that you guys built up stacks to, to 1,000, the guy opens for, say the blinds are 3 and 5, so he opens up to 25. And you call with, 5-6 suited, and the board comes out, 7-4 deuce with a couple spades, or even without any spades, backdoor spade draw, and he's got an overpair. He bets pot, you bump it up to 150, he calls. Now every time that you're going to bet 150, it's a smaller proportion of the pot. He's going to be getting 3-1, 150 into 300, 150 to win 400. Now the pot's 600. You bet 150 again. He's never really folding. So I think that, the way to approach draws, it's very, very difficult to instill the type of fear in an opponent that he's going to lose an entire stack, because inherently, the betting size is capped. It's like playing a capped no-limit game, if any of you guys ever play capped no-limit games online. So you have to adjust that. Maybe the best strategy is to almost, kind of fall into some sort of passive shell with your draws, unless, of course, you're up against the type of opponent that will release because he doesn't want to lose, the additional 150 you're raising him on the flop, $450. Now, in a small game, like I said, where the initial buy-in is $350, it starts to play the same in the beginning. But you do not have as much of an edge when you get deeper as you would in a no-limit game. And hopefully you guys, you follow that. So that's when you kind of have to tone it down sometimes. With your big draws, you've got to tone it down, calling big raises with small pocket pairs. Again, because, what type of money, are you going to make? Are you going to be able to make that 10 to 20 times with a big pocket pair? You've got to really figure out the pot size in relation to how much you can bet. I'm not exactly sure why some of these places have spread limit. I think it has something to do with the laws of, a maximum bet size per street, or you can only have, a lot of times these places, like, you can only have a $150 maximum bet. Even if they're playing blackjack, and it applies over to poker as well. So there's only a $150 maximum bet, or whatever the spread limit is. And obviously, if the spread limit is less, if it's a $5 to $30 spread limit game with this type of structure, or a $5 to $50 spread limit game with this type of structure, the game is going to play more like a limit game, and then you really need to start folding those hands that you're accustomed to playing in no limit, those implied odds hands, go way, way down in value. When you're playing limit hold'em, you're never really cold calling like a raise with pocket deuces or pocket threes. If you're playing a spread 5-50 game, you got to really figure out, am I going to call here? How much can I possibly make? And the smaller the spread, the less that you can make, and the more the pre-flop, starting hand requirements tend to, lean towards a limit hold'em pre-flop starting hand requirements where high cards have more value as opposed to those mid-ish suited connectors. I hope that answers your question, Jason. And again, like I said, I'm not terribly familiar with spread limit, but that's pretty much my best guesstimate as to how you should approach those games. Another email here from Troy Olson. He says, I am unsure of how to play flopped 2-pair hands out of the blinds. It seems to me that a check raise becomes incredibly transparent on but on draw heavy boards, aren't my opponents always getting the odds to call? And this is a very, very good question, Troy. Sometimes I struggle with this in my game as well. I am not a huge proponent of check raising with 2-pair hands. And part of the reason why is, of course, because what we talked about, way ahead, way behind. I think that you lose value from players that would continue to call multiple streets with just top pair. Whereas if you go ahead and check raise them, they're going to fold their weak queen on a 4-3 queen board. And you have 3-4. And you check raise and they fold. I think that you actually get more value by leading out. Now, the tricky thing happens is when the board is so draw heavy. The board's queen 5-6 with 2 clubs. You've got 6-5. You're leading out into, 4 or 5 people. Well, what are the scary cards that can come on the turn, especially when multiple people call you? Obviously, any flush completing card, any card that completes 7-8, which of course is a 4, a 9, any card that completes 3, 4, 6, or a deuce. You might get scared of a Broadway card that, a queen would make queens up on the turn. An ace would make queens up on the turn or make aces up. But I think you have to ask yourself what type of player you are, because I can see the point that you might want to check to drive out the competition. If a late position, player bets and you want to drive out the draws. I understand that. But I think that you can, especially, and we're going to get to bet folding, at the end of the show. I've talked about bet folding. I talked about, again, paying attention at the table. You throw a bet out there with 5-6 on queen 5-6. Now the turn's a jack, and now a guy raises you. Well, the chances are your bottom 2 is not good. Anytime at this level that somebody raises, it's more indicative of a 2-pair plus type hand, which you now don't beat because you can't beat any 2-pair, than a hand that's a draw and somebody's raising on the come. So I would prefer not to check raise my 2 hands because I want to get value from those weaker hands. And I can also figure out what types of draws people are on. If the flush card also comes, you can check, and a lot of times guys will check back, and you can throw out a kind of a thin river bet, and they'll call you with top pair. You can play a hand like that. But I agree with you, Troy, that check raising out of the blinds is an incredibly transparent play with 2-pair. And again, just like at the top of the show, I said one of the most prevalent patterns that I've picked up on is that when someone check raises in the blinds, they have almost 100% of the time 2-pair. So, you're basically playing your hand face up. And those are the types of spots where I like to go for my combo draws, not to re-raise when I'm in the field, but to call, because the weaker players just can't get away from their 2-pair, even though the action suggests that I'm on some sort of draw. They just look at their hand and they say, well, I've got 2-pair, so I have to call. I can fill up. And sometimes I can even get 2 streets of value from them. So, again, and actually this was talked about, I think, way back in the episode after the first Simoleus episode, which was, I think, called PLO 8 and Fran C, when we talked a little bit about 2-pairs, and he talked about how he didn't like to check raise out of the blind with 2-pairs. He liked to lead out. I like that play as well. I really like to lead out. Again, one of the other patterns that I've talked about is the min raise. You lead out with bottom two, and a guy min raises you at these levels, at lower levels. What I've noticed the last 3 weeks is that is an indicative of a top pair type raise, a king queen or an ace queen on a queen 5-6 board. Play the hand accordingly. Well, if the guy raises and you re-raise, is he going to fold king queen or ace queen? Player dependent issue. A lot of guys will, a lot of guys won't. If he's the type of guy that will not call a re-raise with one pair, then you might think about calling and leading turn and leading river, which might be a better line, and getting some value from that hand. Now, he's driving the draws out. Now you're going to get value from him, but you don't want to drive him onto the pot with a 3-bet, with a bet 3-bet line. So I hope that helps with your question, Troy. We have another email here from Timothy Olson. And he says, Bart, I am having trouble playing against maniacs. How do you counter a maniac that always calls your 3-bets when he's out of position and is opening over 50% of his range? And Timothy goes on to give some other examples as well in this email. But basically, I'm going to sum it up where he was just saying that, he's seen these maniacs, these drunk maniacs, open with just a huge, huge range of hands, and he doesn't feel like he should call with like ace 9s or ace 10s because he doesn't really know where he's at in the hand, and the guy's going to fire, and if he misses, he doesn't know if he's got enough showdown value to continue on. Ace 9, it's really tough. The board comes out, jack deuce 7, the guy fires. I mean, how can you call? It's a really tough spot. But at the same time, when he's 3-betting hands that figure to be a favorite over his opponent's range, his opponent is calling, and his opponent is calling with any piece to his 3-bet continuation bet on the flop. And it becomes a difficult spot, Timothy. It's interesting. I think that the best way to go about doing it is to 3-bet, because a lot of times maniacs at these mid-levels, again, this is the type of thing that I've been seeing, they won't ever really 4-bet you with air. And again, I don't want to generalize, but this is just what I've been observing. I haven't seen them 4-bet a ton with air. Normally, they'll just call, and then it becomes difficult because, the board comes out 9 high. You bet they could be calling with ace high. You really don't have much of an idea. But again, the beauty of Hold'em is that most people are going to miss the flop. One of the other things that we've talked about is not 3-betting with ace king, ace queen, even sometimes hands like king queen and ace jack, because these guys, especially these maniacs, if they're opening with 50% of their range, they're probably opening any ace. And there's an inherent value in flat calling for value as opposed to re-raising, as to not drive that guy out. Now, if he's calling with ace 5s anyways to your 3-bet, well, then you want to re-raise for value. But, it's a kind of an interesting line that, kind of like walking a tightrope as to what to do. And, again, you've just got to observe. I mean, that's really my answer is, how do you counter a maniac? Well, can you tell me, Timothy, how the maniacs played in the previous 15 hands? Every single situation that he's played in? Because if you can't answer those questions, then you can't go about making the correct move. And especially if it's a random maniac that's not in your player pool. You've got to watch the guy's tendencies to figure out what your best line is. And there is no clear-cut answer as to what to do, to counter a maniac. The general idea would be, well, if he's opening with a wide range, then you're going to 3-bet him with a wide range because he should be folding. But the problem is, if these guys don't fold and they're always peeling on the flop, and you've bet and they've called and you've missed the flop, do you double barrel? Do you 3-barrel? And especially if the guy's going to call you down with bottom pair, that's probably not the best line. So should you just wait around and bet for value? Again, there's no, wait to make a hand and then just crush the guy. Again, there isn't really a clear-cut answer. You've really got to watch, what the guy does, what types of boards he folds, what does he peel off, watch the hand that he was in before. Is he check calling with bottom pair and then folding on the turn when unimproved? Is he peeling with overcards? Is he peeling with a gut shot? What's his range of two-barrel calling? That's probably one of the biggest things. If you're going to 3-bet light a guy who's got a wide range pre-flop, what is his two-barrel calling range out of position? You fire twice. What are the hands that he's calling with? And then sometimes if it gets down to 3 barrels, what's he calling with on the river? All things that you have to observe. I hope that helped you out there, Timothy. That's going to do it for the emails. There's one last thing I want to address, and it's one of the most important things. And I've talked about it last week. I talked about it in previous weeks. But again, now that I've had a heavy dose of lower level no limit, which I haven't played in, a couple of years, all I can say is bet fold. Bet fold, bet fold, bet fold. Never be scared of making thin value bets, and don't be scared of folding pretty close to nut hands when raised on the river. I will give you an example. A couple days ago, I was in the blind with 7-9 of diamonds. And, there are 4 people in the hand. The board came out king 3-7 with 2 diamonds, so I had middle pair and a flush draw. I bet out 40. I got a couple of callers. Now the pot's 160. The turn's the 8 of diamonds. So I've got a 9 high flush. I bet out, I think it was 170. I get 2 callers again. Now you say to yourself, well, shouldn't one of these guys have the nut flush? Possibly. Could they have a higher flush? Possibly, yes. But at these levels, I think that the correct play on the river is to bet fold. The pot's now bloated up to almost $900. Bet an amount that you're kind of comfortable folding to a raise, where you think that you can get some value from some 2-pair type hands. A lot of these guys can't release sets. They've slow played on the flop. I bet 450. This tight, solid, older guy to my left raised to 1200, and it's an easy bet fold. And he showed me the nut flush. When you play at these levels, it's just a bread and butter play. One of the most important, tools in your arsenal for obtaining maximum value. I just don't like checking because I'm scared that a guy might have a better hand. I like betting and then knowing that there's no way that the guy is ever going to raise. Again, 99% of the competition's ever going to raise unless I'm beat. And this is usually has to do with stacks with, more than 75 to 80 big blinds. Because once you start getting down to 30, 40, 50, it's kind of tough. People overvalue, hands. You're playing 5-10 against a $400 stack and you've got pocket aces and you make a continuation bet on jack high flop and the guy shoves. It's kind of difficult to get away for $400. But, you're playing 900. Let's say that your villain's got $800 or $900 deep. You've bumped it up to 40 with pocket aces, and your head's up, and the board comes out, Jack 10-7, and you bet 75, and the guy calls, and it's let's say that there's a flush draw out there, turns a deuce, now you bet 150, and the guy calls. River's 3. Doesn't complete the flush. You bet for value 250, and now the guy moves in. There's just really no way that, unless this guy is a savvy guy and he's just raising on a busted flush draw, that you're good there. And again, I haven't seen players make that type of move. A more cutthroat example, or a clear-cut example, is, if that board didn't have a flush draw out there, Jack 10-7, bet, call, turns a 3, bet, call, river's a deuce, bet, all in. You're just never good there. But I don't want to check my aces down because I really think that I'm losing value against a guy that's getting stubborn, thinking that I'm firing 3 barrels with ace king, and he's going to call me with king jack, ace jack, or queen jack. He's never going to raise all in with those hands, but he'll certainly call. And when I bet, I can fold to his raise. That's going to wrap things up. We will be back next week. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you on the next episode.